Mike Sullivan's morning school bus route was about to change forever when a terrified second grader ran to him crying. The boy's 4 words, "They're hurting my sister," would set in motion an incredible rescue mission. Armed men had taken his family hostage, demanding money from his father. What the criminals didn't expect was a school bus driver who knew exactly how to handle a crisis. Through quick thinking and careful planning, Mike transformed a routine morning into a sophisticated rescue operation. Working with local law enforcement, he helped orchestrate a daring plan that would save not just one family, but expose an entire criminal organization. This is the story of how a child's trust in his bus driver led to an extraordinary rescue. Before we jump back into the video, let us know where you're watching from and if you're enjoying this story. Don't forget to subscribe because I have something really special for you tomorrow. And now, back to the video. Today, neither of them was there. Mike checked his watch. He always gave each stop a 3-minute grace period, long enough to account for morning delays, but not so long that it threw off his entire schedule. As he waited, he noticed movement. In the Martinez house windows, shadows passing quickly back and forth. At the 2-minute mark, the front door burst open. Diego came running down the driveway, his backpack half-zipped and his jacket missing a button. Behind him, Mike could hear raised voices speaking rapidly in Spanish, though he couldn't make out the words. Something was wrong. Mike could feel it in his bones, the same way he could sense an incoming storm or a mechanical problem with his bus before any warning lights appeared. The boy's face was flushed, and not just from running. Diego climbed the bus steps with his head down, but Mike caught a glimpse of red-rimmed eyes and trembling lips. Years of experience had taught him when to speak up and when to simply observe. This moment called for careful attention. "Morning, Diego," he said softly, keeping his voice casual and warm. "Bit of a rush today, huh?" The boy nodded without looking up and hurried to his usual seat, 3rd row from the front. Mike watched in his mirror as Diego pressed himself against the window, making himself as small as possible. Other children chatted and laughed around him, but he remained isolated in his bubble of obvious distress. Mike pulled away from the curb, his mind already working through the possibilities. In 23 years, he'd seen every kind of childhood crisis imaginable. He'd learned when to alert the school counselor, when to have a quiet word with a teacher, and when to make a more serious report to authorities. But something told him this situation was different. His instincts, honed by decades of watching over other people's children, whispered that whatever was troubling Diego needed immediate attention. As the bus continued its route, Mike kept one eye on his young passenger. Diego hadn't moved from his hunched position, and his shoulders shook slightly in a way that suggested he was trying very hard not to cry. Mike had 5 more stops before reaching Cedar Grove Elementary. 5 more opportunities to decide whether to intervene or let the school handle whatever was wrong. But the knot in his stomach grew tighter with each passing minute. He'd seen too many children suffer in silence, their problems overlooked until they became too big to handle. Sometimes all it took was one adult paying attention, asking the right questions, showing that they cared enough to notice when something wasn't right. The bus turned onto Oak Street, and Mike made a decision. At the next stop, he would find a way to check on Diego properly. Sometimes a bus driver wasn't just someone who transported children from point A to point B. Sometimes they were the first line of defense in a child's world, the first adult to notice when something wasn't right. Little did Mike know, this morning would test everything he'd learned in his 23 years behind the wheel. The next few minutes would change not only his life, but the lives of everyone on Bus 127. The bus had just completed its stop at Oak Street when everything changed. Mike was checking his mirror, preparing to pull away from the curb, when he noticed Diego standing up. This itself was unusual. The boy knew the rules about staying, seated while the bus was in motion. But what happened next would haunt Mike for years to come. Diego suddenly bolted from his seat, stumbling down the aisle as the bus began to move. Mike immediately hit the brakes, bringing the vehicle to a gentle but firm stop. Years of training kicked in automatically. Check mirrors, activate flashes, secure the bus. "They're hurting my sister." 4 words. 4 simple words that cut through the morning chatter like a knife. The bus fell silent as Diego reached the front, tears now flowing freely down his face. His small hands gripped the metal railing so tightly, his knuckles had turned white. Mike's world narrowed to the terrified face before him. Diego's words hung in the air, heavy with implications that made his stomach turn. 23 years of experience hadn't prepared him for the raw desperation in the child's voice. "Diego," Mike said softly, turning in his seat to face the boy fully. "Can you tell me what's happening?" The other children watched in stunned silence. Even the usual troublemakers in the back seemed to understand the gravity of the moment. The only sound was Diego's ragged breathing as he tried to form words through his tears. "The men, they came last night," Diego managed between sobs. "They have guns. They said if Papa calls the police." He couldn't finish the sentence, his small frame shaking with fear and exhaustion. Mike's mind raced through protocols and procedures, but none of them quite fit this situation. This wasn't a case of forgotten homework or playground bullying. This was something far more dangerous. "Are they still at your house?" Mike asked, keeping his voice calm despite the alarm bells ringing in his head. Diego nodded, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "They're waiting for Papa to come back with money. Mama's there, and Rosa, she's only 5. Diego's voice broke on his sister's age, and Mike felt something in his chest tighten. Through the bus windows, the morning continued as normal. Parents walked dogs, people headed to work, and the world spun on, unaware of the crisis unfolding inside Bus 127. Mike knew his next actions would be crucial. He reached for his radio, then hesitated. If there were armed men in the house, using the radio could put Diego's family in more danger. They might be monitoring emergency frequencies. He needed to handle this carefully. "Listen to me, Diego," Mike said, placing a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did the right thing telling me. Now I'm going to help you, but I need you to be brave for just a little longer. Can you do that?" Diego nodded, his brown eyes wide with trust that made Mike's heart ache. This child had chosen him. A school, bus driver as his lifeline. Mike refused to let him down. He turned to address the bus at large. "Kids, we're going to take a little detour this morning. Everyone stay in your seats." Then, lower to Diego. "Stay right here beside me." "Hook," slightly in a way that suggested he was trying very hard not to cry. Mike reached slowly into his pocket for his personal cell phone. No radio chatter to alert anyone monitoring frequencies, just a quiet 911 call that would set things in motion. But before he could dial, Diego grabbed his arm. "They said they're watching," he whispered, terror making his voice shake. "They said they'll know if anyone calls for help." The implications were clear. These weren't amateur criminals. They had planned this carefully. They were likely monitoring police frequencies and watching the house. One wrong move could put Diego's family in immediate danger. Mike took a deep breath, 23 years of crisis management experience flowing through his mind. He needed to get help without alerting the criminals, protect Diego and the other children on his bus, and somehow keep the boy's family safe. "Diego," Mike said carefully, "those men in your house, did they know you were leaving for school?" The Yao boy shook his head. "Mama told them I was sick staying in my room. I climbed out the window when I heard them talking about Rosa." Brave kid, terrified for his family, but clear-headed enough to find help. Mike felt a surge of pride mixed with his growing concern. Now he had to prove worthy of this child's trust and courage. The other children on the bus remained unusually quiet, seeming to understand the seriousness of the situation. Some of the older ones had their phones out, but a quick, stern look from Mike had them putting the devices away. The last thing they needed was this showing up on social media. Time was critical. Each minute that passed was another minute Diego's family spent in danger. But any obvious move toward getting help could put them at even greater risk. Mike needed a plan. Something subtle enough to avoid detection, but effective enough to save lives. He glanced at his watch. 7:42 a.m. The school would be expecting bus 127 in less than 15 minutes. Soon, people would start wondering about their delay. He had to act fast, but he had to act smart. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on Mike's shoulders. In 23 years of driving a school bus, he'd handled countless emergencies, medical crises, accidents, severe weather. But this was different. This time, his decisions could mean the difference between life and death for a family. Looking into Diego's trusting eyes, Mike made his decision. He wouldn't let this boy down. Not today. Not ever. Not to cry. Mike's mind worked quickly as he assessed his options. The bus had become unnaturally quiet, with even the youngest children seeming to understand the gravity of the situation. Diego stood beside him, small fingers still clutching the metal railing, watching with desperate hope as Mike formulated a plan. 23 years on the job had taught Mike one crucial lesson. Sometimes the best solutions were the simplest ones. He needed to alert authorities without raising suspicion, and he needed to do it in a way that wouldn't endanger Diego's family. "Diego," Mike said softly, "does your bus stop look different from usual? Any cars you don't recognize? People watching?" The boy thought for a moment, then shook his head. "I don't think so. I was scared. I didn't look around much." Mike nodded, his plan taking shape. He reached for his clipboard, the one containing his daily route sheet and incident reports. Years of handling school bus paperwork was about to prove unexpectedly useful. "Listen carefully," he said, pitching his voice so only Diego could hear. "I'm going to drive the bus like normal, but we're going to make an extra stop. If anyone's watching your house, they'll just see the regular morning bus route." He turned to address the other children, keeping his voice calm but firm. "Everyone, we're having some mechanical issues this morning." A practiced lie, one he'd used before during genuine engine troubles. "We need to stop at the maintenance depot before school." The kids groaned. They knew this meant they might be late, but no one questioned it. Mike had built up too much trust over the years for that. Besides, they'd all heard Diego's desperate words and understood something serious was happening. Mike picked up his radio, making a show of checking it before speaking. "Dispatch, this is bus 127. Got a warning light on my dashboard. Going to swing by maintenance for a quick check before school drop-off. Over." Sarah's voice crackled back. "Copy that, 127. Want me to alert the school about the delay?" "Affirmative," Mike replied, then added casually, "Can you have Joe meet me? He knows this bus's quirks better than anyone." It was a code they'd developed years ago, though they'd never had to use it for something this serious. Requesting Joe specifically was their signal for a serious emergency requiring police response. Sarah would understand. Diego watched this exchange with worried eyes. "But what about my family? We can't just—" "Trust me," Mike interrupted gently. "Sometimes the best way to help is to be smart about it. Those men think they've got everything under control. Let's keep it that way while help gets into position." He could see the moment Diego understood, hope flickering across his tear-stained face. Smart kid. Mike had chosen this approach carefully, maintaining normal appearances while mobilizing help through back channels. The bus maintenance depot was actually a police substation. They'd set it up years ago after a series of incidents made it clear that school buses needed a safe haven. Between school and home, most people in town thought it was just a repair shop, which was exactly the point. Mike carefully maneuvered the bus back into traffic, maintaining his usual route and speed. No need to draw attention. Through his mirror, he could see some of the older kids typing on their phones, no doubt sharing the morning's drama, despite his earlier warning looks. "Hannah," he called to one of his regular 8th graders, "could you make sure everyone understands this is private? No social media, no texts about what's happening. It's important." Hannah nodded solemnly, immediately beginning to spread the word among her peers. Another lesson Mike had learned: older students could be powerful allies in maintaining order and discretion when they understood the stakes. Diego remained standing beside him, too anxious to return to his seat. Mike didn't have the heart to enforce the rules right now. Instead, he kept up a quiet conversation, gathering crucial details while keeping the boy calm. "The men, how many are there?" "3, Diego whispered. "2 stay downstairs with Mama. And Rosa. One watches upstairs and talks on the phone a lot. And your father? Where exactly did they send him?" "To get money from his business partner. They said he has 2 hours. That was early this morning." Diego's voice cracked. "They said if he doesn't come back—" "He will," Mike assured him, though his stomach tightened at the implications. "And we're going to make sure everyone stays safe." Through his mirror, Mike could see the other children watching them, their young faces serious and concerned. In all his years, the maintenance depot appeared ahead, a nondescript industrial building painted in fading beige. To most residents of Cedar Grove, it was just another municipal facility, its true purpose hidden behind carefully maintained mundanity. Mike knew better. Behind those weathered walls lay a fully equipped police command center, ready to respond to any crisis involving the town's school transportation system. As he pulled the bus into the depot's wide entrance, Mike noticed the subtle signs of mobilization. A maintenance in progress sign had been freshly placed at the entrance, standard procedure to prevent civilian vehicles from entering during an emergency response. Through his mirrors, he caught glimpses of movement behind the building's tinted windows. "Why are there so many cars?" Diego asked nervously, noticing the unusual number of vehicles parked around the building's perimeter. To untrained eyes, they looked like ordinary maintenance vehicles and personal cars belonging to depot workers. Mike recognized them as unmarked. "Police units. They're here to help," he said softly, carefully maneuvering Bus 127 into the main bay. The large garage door rolled down behind them with a mechanical whir, sealing them inside. "Remember, Diego, you did the right thing telling me. Now let the grown-ups handle this." The interior of the depot transformed as soon as the door closed. What appeared to be mechanics and maintenance workers shed their coveralls, revealing tactical gear underneath. Sarah from dispatch emerged from an office accompanied by 2 plainclothes detectives and a crisis negotiator. "Kids," Mike announced, keeping his voice steady, "we're going to need you to follow Miss Sarah to the break room. They've got breakfast and cartoons set up for you while we check out the bus." The children filed out quietly, many casting worried glances at Diego. Hannah, the 8th grader, lingered until last. "We didn't post anything, Mr. Sullivan. Not one text or photo, we promise." "Thank you, Hannah," Mike replied, touched by their understanding. That was very responsible. As soon as the last student cleared the bus, the space erupted into controlled activity. Detective Lisa Chen, whom Mike knew from previous incidents, approached them directly. "Diego," she said gently, kneeling to meet his eye level. "I'm Detective Chen. You're very brave, coming to Mr. Sullivan for help. Can you tell me exactly what's happening at your house?" Diego looked to Mike for reassurance before speaking. Over the next 20 minutes, he provided details that made the detective's expression grow increasingly grave. 3 armed men had entered their home around midnight, apparently knowing his father's schedule and business dealings. They were professional, methodical, and had clearly planned the operation carefully. "They have cameras," Diego added, his voice trembling. "I heard them talking. They set them up outside to watch for police." Detective Chen nodded, gesturing to a technical specialist who immediately began typing on a laptop. "That's very helpful information, Diego. Did you hear anything about what kind of cameras or where they put them?" While Diego answered questions, Mike observed the operation unfolding around them. A tactical team was already gearing up, their movements precise and practiced. Another group huddled around monitors, showing satellite imagery of Diego's neighborhood. The level of response indicated they understood the seriousness of the situation. Sarah approached Mike, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by professional focus. All buses have been quietly rerouted away from the target area. We've implemented the school lockdown procedure under the guise of a surprise safety drill. No one outside this room knows the real situation. Mike nodded approvingly. The procedures they developed over years of planning were working smoothly. Keep things normal on the surface while mobilizing resources underneath. Don't tip off the criminals. Protect the civilians. Detective Chen finished her interview with Diego and moved to brief the tactical team. The boy remained close to Mike, drawing comfort from the familiar presence of his bus driver amidst the chaos of emergency response. "Mr. Sullivan," Diego said quietly, "what if they hurt my family because I ran away? What if they find out I told?" Mike placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Listen to me, Diego. Those men think everything is going according to their plan. They think they're in control. But thanks to you, we're already 10 steps ahead of them. These people," he gestured to the busy room around them, "are the best at what they do, and they're going to help your family." A tall man in tactical gear approached them, his movement deliberate and controlled. "Diego, I'm Captain Reynolds. We need your help with something very important. Can you draw us a picture of your house? Show us where everyone was when you left?" The next hour passed in a blur of activity. Diego worked with a police sketch artist, creating detailed layouts of his home. Technical experts analyzed the surveillance camera information. Tactical teams developed entry strategies. Through it all, Mike remained by Diego's side, a steady presence in the chaos. "Time check," Captain Reynolds called out. "How long until the kidnapper's deadline?" 43 minutes, someone responded. The captain nodded grimly. "We need to move soon. They'll get nervous as the deadline approaches." That's when mistakes happen. Dangerous mistakes. Mike felt Diego tense beside him. The boy had been incredibly brave and composed, but he was still just a child dealing with overwhelming fear for his family. Without thinking, Mike pulled him into a gentle hug. "It's okay to be scared," he whispered. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you do what's right even when you are afraid. And you, Diego Martinez, are one of the bravest people I've ever met." Detective Chen rejoined them, her expression serious but confident. "We're ready to move. Diego, we need you to stay. Here with Mr. Sullivan. Can you do that for us?" Diego nodded, though his grip on Mike's hand tightened. Around them, the tactical team made final preparations, checking weapons and communications equipment. The atmosphere in the depot grew tense, with anticipation. Captain Reynolds gathered his team for a final briefing. "Remember, we have 2 primary objectives: secure the hostages and prevent the suspects from realizing they were compromised by the boy. We need them to think they still have the upper hand until the moment we take them down." Mike watched the final preparations with a mixture of pride and anxiety. In 23 years of driving a school bus, he'd helped handle many crises, but none quite like this. The trust of a frightened child had set in motion an operation that would put his entire community to the test. As the tactical team moved out, Mike held Diego close and whispered a quiet prayer. Sometimes the most important journeys didn't involve driving a bus at all. Sometimes they involved simply being there when a child needed someone to trust. The next hour would determine whether that trust had been well placed. The command center within the maintenance depot hummed with controlled tension as multiple screens displayed thermal imaging of the Martinez home. Mike and Diego sat together, watching the careful choreography of the rescue operation unfold. The tactical team had deployed with practiced precision, using the coverage of early morning shadows and typical neighborhood activities to move into position undetected. "Look at this, Diego," Mike said softly, pointing to one of the monitors where figures moved with careful deliberation. "See how they're working together? Just like a well-oiled machine. Every person knows exactly what to do." Detective Chen stood nearby, coordinating with various teams through her headset. "Thermal confirms 5 heat signatures on the ground floor, 2 more upstairs. Positions matched the floor plan Diego provided. Team 1 in position, Team 2 moving to secondary entry point. The technology in the command center amazed Mike. What looked like an ordinary maintenance depot's break room had transformed into something out of a spy movie, with high-tech surveillance equipment and communication systems that could coordinate dozens of officers simultaneously. Signal from Mr. Martinez received, an analyst called out. He's following instructions, approaching the house from the north side. Time check, 17 minutes until deadline. Diego tensed beside Mike. His father was walking into danger, unaware that help was already in position. Mike squeezed the boy's shoulder reassuringly. Your dad's doing exactly what he needs to do, keeping those men focused on him while our people get ready. The surveillance feeds showed Mr. Martinez's approach. He carried a briefcase, his movements slow and deliberate. Through the thermal imaging, they could see the armed men reacting to his arrival, 2 moving to cover the front door, while 1 remained with Mrs. Martinez and Rosa. All units, hold positions, Captain Reynolds commanded through the radio. Wait for primary target to clear the entrance. Remember, we need clean lines of sight before we move. The next few minutes unfolded with excruciating slowness. Mr. Martinez entered the house, and the thermal images showed all 3 hostage-takers converging on his position, exactly as the tactical team had hoped. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. All threats grouped together, away from the hostages. Execute, Captain Reynolds ordered, his voice calm but authoritative. All teams, go. The operation happened so quickly that even the high-tech monitors barely captured it. All. Multiple entry points were breached simultaneously, with flashbang devices creating careful disorientation. The tactical teams moved like shadows, their training evident in every precise movement. Targets secured, came the first report, followed quickly by, hostages safe, all suspects in custody. Diego burst into tears, not of fear this time, but of relief. Mike held him close, his own eyes misty as they watched the thermal images of the Martinez family being safely evacuated from the house. The entire operation had taken less than 30 seconds from start to finish. Your family's safe, Mike whispered to Diego. You did it, buddy. Your bravery made this possible. Detective Chen approached them, a warm smile on her face. Diego, would you like to see your family now? They're on their way here. The reunion that followed would stay with Mike forever. The Martinez family burst into the command center, Mrs. Martinez scooping Diego into her arms while Mr. Martinez wrapped them both in a fierce embrace. Little Rosa seemed confused but happy, clinging to her big brother as soon as she could reach him. Mi héroe, Mrs. Martinez kept saying through her tears, kissing Diego's face. My brave, brave boy. Mr. Martinez turned to Mike, his eyes full of gratitude. Thank you, he said simply, extending his hand. Thank you for listening to my son. Mike shook the offered hand, feeling the emotion of the moment. Diego's the real hero here. He knew something was wrong, and he trusted his instincts. That's not easy for anyone, let alone a child. Detective Chen gave the family a few moments before gently interrupting. Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, we'll need to take your statements, and there are some papers to sign. But first, I want you to know that we've already received confirmation. All 3 suspects are known members of a criminal organization we've been tracking. Your son's actions today haven't just saved your family. They've helped us crack a much bigger case. As the Martinez family moved to another room with the detective, Diego broke away for a moment and ran back to Mike, throwing his arms around his bus driver's waist. Thank you for believing me, he said, his voice muffled against Mike's jacket. Mike knelt down to eye level with the boy. Diego, listen to me. In 23 years of driving that bus, I've learned that sometimes the most important thing we can do is listen when a child tells us something's wrong. You were brave enough to speak up, and that made all the difference. The boy nodded, wiping his eyes with his sleeve before running back to his family. Mike watched them go, feeling a profound sense of gratitude for the trust a frightened child had placed in him that morning. Sarah appeared beside him, holding out a cup of coffee. "Not bad for a regular Tuesday morning, huh, Mike?" He accepted the coffee with a tired smile. "You know what? I think Bus 127 can wait for its maintenance check. Those kids need to get to school." "Already arranged alternate transportation," Sarah replied with a wink. "Take the rest of the day off. You've earned it." But Mike shook his head. "Those kids need normal right now. They need to see that life goes on, that adults keep their promises, that the world is still safe. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I've got 23 years of perfect attendance. Hate to break that streak now." As he walked back to his bus, Mike reflected on how ordinary decisions, like taking a moment to really listen to a child, could have extraordinary consequences. Sometimes, he realized, the most important journeys weren't measured in miles, but in moments of trust and courage. The morning sun had fully risen now, casting long shadows across the maintenance depot's parking lot. In a few minutes, he would restart his route, picking up the remaining children who trusted him to get them safely to school. But he knew that today's real journey, the one that had started with 4 desperate words from a frightened boy, had already reached its destination. And somewhere in Cedar Grove, a family was whole again, because a school bus driver had learned that sometimes the most important part of his job was simply being there when a child needed someone to trust. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity at Cedar Grove Elementary School. Mike completed his route as promised, delivering the remaining children to school with his usual careful attention to safety. But word of the morning's events had already begun to spread through the tight-knit community, carried by hushed whispers and concerned glances. Principal Eleanor Matthews waited at the school entrance, her normally stern expression softened with concern. She'd been briefed about the situation and had implemented emergency protocols without alarming the student body. As children filed off Bus 127, she noticed how they moved differently, quieter, more serious, bound together by the morning's shared experience. "Mike," she called, approaching the bus door. "The crisis counselor is here. We've set up in the library for any students who need to talk about what happened." Mike nodded, completing his post-route checklist with mechanical precision. "Good." Thinking. Those kids handled themselves well, but they saw something today that most adults never have to face. Inside the school, the day proceeded with careful normalcy. Teachers maintained their regular schedules while watching for signs of distress among their students. The children from Bus 127 stuck close together during breaks, forming impromptu support groups in the hallways and cafeteria. Hannah, the 8th grader, who had helped maintain calm during the crisis, emerged as a natural leader. She organized a card-making session during lunch, helping younger students process their feelings through art and written messages for the Martinez family. Mr. Sullivan, she caught him during his afternoon pickup route. "We made something. For Diego and his family." She handed him a large envelope filled with colorful cards and drawings. "We wanted them to know we're all thinking about them." Mike carefully secured the envelope in his jacket pocket, touched by the gesture. "That's very thoughtful, Hannah. I'm sure it will mean a lot to them." The afternoon route felt different. Children who normally chaos chattered endlessly sat quietly, processing the day's events in their own ways. Even the usual troublemakers in the back seemed subdued, affected by the weight of what they'd witnessed. At the depot, Sarah waited with fresh coffee and a concerned expression. "How are you holding up, Mike? It's been quite a day." He accepted the coffee gratefully, settling into one of the break room chairs. "Just keeps playing in my head. Those 4 words. If Diego hadn't trusted us enough to speak up." "But he did," Sarah reminded him gently. "Because you've spent 23 years showing these kids they can trust you. That matters, Mike. It mattered more than ever today." Detective Chen arrived as they were talking, looking tired but satisfied. "Thought you'd want an update. We've identified all 3 suspects. They're part of a larger criminal organization we've been tracking. Diego's father wasn't their only target. They'd been planning similar operations across 3 states, Mike. Absorb this information, thinking about how many other families might have been spared because of one boy's courage." How's the Martinez family doing? They're safe. We've moved them to a secure location while we process the suspects. Diego's been asking about you, wants to know if you'll still be his bus driver when they come back. The question brought unexpected tears to Mike's eyes. After everything that had happened, the boy was worried about keeping his bus driver. Tell him bus 127 will be waiting whenever he's ready to return. Later that evening, as Mike completed his final checks on the bus, Principal Matthews approached. Him again. The school board is going to want to recognize you formally, she said. What you did today was just my job, Mike interrupted gently. The real hero is Diego, a 7-year-old boy who had the courage to ask for help when his family was in danger. That's what we should be celebrating. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. You know, we spend so much time teaching children about stranger danger and who not to trust. Sometimes we forget to tell them who they can trust. Today proved how important that is. As darkness fell over the empty school parking lot, Mike sat, in his familiar driver's seat, reviewing the day's events. The envelope of cards sat beside him, filled with messages of hope and support from children who had witnessed both the worst and best of humanity in a single morning. His phone buzzed, with a text from Detective Chen. Martinez family wanted you to see this. Attached was a photo of Diego, surrounded by his parents and sister, all safe and smiling despite their ordeal. The boy held up a hand-drawn picture of Bus 127. Mike saved the photo, knowing it would join the collection of memories he'd gathered. Over 23 years of driving children to and from school, some days were about teaching kids to line up properly or follow safety rules. But today had been about something far more important. It had been about showing them that their voices mattered, that adults would listen, and that help would come when they were brave enough to ask for it. Tomorrow he would drive his route again. Children would climb aboard Bus 127, perhaps a little more thoughtful, a little more aware of the bonds that connected them all. And somewhere in Cedar Grove, a family was safe because a scared little boy had trusted his bus driver enough to speak 4 desperate words. Mike started the bus's engine, preparing to head home. In the quiet of the empty vehicle, he whispered a prayer of thanks, not just for the successful rescue, but for the privilege of being someone children could trust when they needed help the most. Sometimes, he realized, the most important stops on life's journey weren't marked on any route sheet. A week passed before Diego returned to Bus 127. The morning was crisp and clear, much like the day that had changed everything. Mike spotted the Martinez family waiting at their stop, Diego holding his mother's hand while his father stood protectively nearby. Little Rosa waved enthusiastically as the bus approached. The doors opened with their familiar hiss. Diego hesitated for just a moment before climbing the steps, then surprised Mike with a quick hug before heading to his seat. The other children welcomed him back quietly, understanding the significance of the moment without needing words. "Welcome back, buddy," Mike said softly, watching in his mirror as Diego settled into his usual spot. Mrs. Martinez approached the bus door, her eyes bright with emotion. "Mr. Sullivan, we can never thank you enough." "No thanks needed," Mike interrupted gently. "Just doing my job. Besides, Diego's the real hero here." The day felt different, lighter somehow. The children chatted more freely, and Diego gradually joined in their conversations. At one point, Mike heard him explaining to a kindergartner why Mr. Sullivan was the best bus driver ever. During the afternoon route, Hannah organized an impromptu welcome-back celebration, complete with handmade cards and small gifts from the other children. Diego's smile, when he received them, lit up the entire bus. "You know what, Mr. Sullivan?" Diego said as he prepared to leave at his stop that afternoon. "I'm not scared anymore, because I know now that there are people who will help if you just ask." Mike watched the Martinez family greet their son, noting how the whole neighborhood seemed to have come together to support them. Porch lights stayed on longer at night. Neighbors checked in regularly. The community had been transformed by one child's trust and one bus driver's decision to listen. That evening, As Mike parked bus 127 for the night, he found a small drawing tucked near his seat. It showed the bus, but Diego had added a cape to it, making it look like a superhero vehicle. Below, in careful second-grade handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for being my hero." Mike smiled, carefully folding the drawing and placing it in his wallet. Sometimes the most important journeys weren't about the distance traveled, but about the trust built along the way. The Cedar Grove School Board meeting was unusually crowded that Thursday evening. Parents, teachers, and students packed the usually quiet assembly hall, with Bus 127's regular passengers sitting together in a show of solidarity. Mike felt uncomfortable in his one good suit, preferring his familiar driver's uniform to formal wear. "We're here tonight," Principal Matthews began, "to recognize extraordinary actions taken during an extraordinary situation. But first, we have some special guests who'd like to speak." Detective Chen stepped forward, her professional demeanor softening as she addressed the crowd. What happened on Bus 127 wasn't just about saving one family. The information we gathered led to the breakup of a major criminal organization operating across 3 states. Thanks to one brave boy and one alert bus driver, countless other families have been spared similar ordeals. Diego sat with his family in the front row, blushing as people turned to look at him. His father squeezed his shoulder proudly. Hannah, representing the students, spoke next. "Mr. Sullivan always told us that a school bus is like a family. We look out for each other. That morning, he showed us what that really means." Mike listened as speaker after speaker described the events of that morning. But what touched him most were the small details they remembered. How he'd kept the other children calm, how he'd maintained normal routines even in crisis, how he'd known exactly when to act and what to say. When it was his turn to speak, Mike kept it simple. "I've driven Bus 127 for 23 years. Every day parents trust me with their most precious cargo. Diego trusted me when he needed help, but the real hero is him, a young boy brave enough to speak up when his family was in danger." The high superintendent presented Mike with a commendation, but the moment that meant most came after the ceremony. Diego approached him holding a carefully wrapped package. "We made this for you," he said shyly. Inside was a photo frame containing pictures of every child who rode Bus 127, arranged around a central image of the bus itself. Across the bottom, each child had signed their name. "So you never forget your bus family," Diego explained. Mike hung the photo in his bus the next morning. It served as a daily reminder that sometimes the most important part of his job wasn't the driving. It was being someone children could trust when they needed it most. 1 month after the incident, Cedar Grove's School Transportation Department implemented what they called the Sullivan Protocol, a comprehensive training program teaching bus drivers how to recognize and respond to children in crisis. Mike found himself reluctantly serving as a mentor to other drivers, sharing his experiences and insights. "It's not just about driving," he explained during one training session. "It's about noticing the small things, a missed stop, a change in behavior, a quiet cry for help. Sometimes you're the only adult a child sees before and after school. That matters." The Martinez family had become local advocates for child safety awareness. Mrs. Martinez worked with the school board to develop programs teaching children about trusted adults and when to seek help. Mr. Martinez spoke at community meetings about the importance of building relationships between schools, families, and transportation staff. Diego's story had changed things in unexpected ways. Children on Chantahoy. Bus 127 started looking out for each other more deliberately. Older students mentored younger ones, creating a support network that extended beyond the bus rides. Hannah had started a Bus Buddies program, pairing older and younger students to ensure no child ever felt alone. One morning, as Mike checked his bus before his route, he found a new addition to his dashboard, a small plaque installed by the transportation department. It read, "Every journey begins with trust." Below was the date of Diego's brave decision and 4 simple words that had changed everything. "They're hurting my sister." The plaque served as a daily reminder that some heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear bus driver uniforms and simply choose to listen when a child needs help. During his afternoon route that day, Mike noticed Diego helping a new kindergartner learn the bus rules. The boy who had once run to him in terror now exuded confidence, transformed by his experience into someone who helped others feel safe. "Mr. Sullivan," Diego called as he left the bus that afternoon. "Remember when you said the bus was like a family?" Mike nodded, curious. "Well," Diego grinned, "I think we're the best family ever." Looking at his passengers through the rearview mirror, Mike couldn't help but agree. Sometimes the most important families aren't the ones we're born into, but the ones we create along life's journey, even if that journey is just a daily bus route through Cedar Grove. 1 year after the events that transformed Cedar Grove, Mike Sullivan sat in bus 127 early one morning, reflecting on how much had changed. The morning sun cast long shadows across the bus yard, much like it had on that fateful day when a frightened boy had trusted him with 4 desperate words. The Sullivan Protocol had been adopted by school districts across the state, and Mike had reluctantly become something of a celebrity in educational transportation circles. He'd been asked to speak at conferences, contribute to training manuals, and share his story with other districts. But he always kept his message simple. Listen to the children. Sometimes they tell you what's wrong in ways that aren't obvious. Today was special. It was Diego's last day riding bus 127 before his family moved to a larger house across town. The Martinez family had flourished in the year since their ordeal. Mr. Martinez had started a successful security consulting business, helping schools and communities develop better safety protocols. Mrs. Martinez had become the PTA president, focusing on programs that strengthened connections between families and school staff. As Mike began his morning route, he noticed small changes that had become permanent fixtures in the community. Neighbors watched out for each other's children more deliberately now. Parents chatted with him at stops, sharing concerns and celebrations alike. The bus had become more than transportation. It was a vital communication link in the community's safety net. Hannah, now in her final year of middle school, had transformed the Bus Buddies program into a district-wide initiative. Older students throughout Cedar Grove now mentored younger ones, creating a culture of support and awareness that extended far beyond their bus rides. "Morning, Mr. Sullivan," Diego called, bounding up the steps with his usual enthusiasm. Behind him, Rosa skipped along, now a kindergartner herself, and just as beloved by the bus community as her brother. "Special day, buddy," Mike replied, noting how much taller Diego had grown. The scared second grader had transformed into a confident third grader who looked out for others the way Mike had once looked out for him. Throughout the morning route, children kept bringing small gifts to Diego, drawings, cards, and small mementos to remember them by. The bus had become its own kind of family, just as Mike had always said it should be. At the last stop before school, Diego surprised everyone by standing up at the front of the bus with his sister. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, his voice clear and strong, "we have something for you." Rosa handed over a carefully wrapped package. "Mama said we could give it early instead of waiting for the afternoon." Inside was a handmade scrapbook. The cover read, "Bus 127, more than just a ride," in careful lettering. As Mike flipped through it, he found photos, stories, and messages from dozens of families whose children had ridden his bus over the years. The Martinez family's story was there, along with newspaper clippings about the Sullivan Protocol and its impact on other communities. But what touched him most was the final page. It held a single photograph of bus 127 at sunrise, taken by Diego himself. Beneath it, he had written, "Some heroes drive buses. Thank you for being ours." "We made copies for everyone," Diego explained, gesturing to his fellow passengers. "So, no one forgets what happened here. How one person listening can change everything." Mike had to take a moment to compose himself before speaking. "You know, Diego, in 24 years of driving this bus, I've learned something important. Heroes come in all sizes. Sometimes they're scared second graders who are brave enough to ask for help. Sometimes they're older kids who look out for younger ones. Sometimes they're families who turn something terrible into a way to help others. The afternoon route was filled with celebration. Parents gathered at Diego's stop for a surprise farewell party, complete with a cake decorated to look like Bus 127. Even Detective Chen stopped by, sharing news that the criminal organization they'd helped bring down was still leading to arrests and rescued families across the country. As Diego prepared to step off Bus 127 for the last time, he turned back to Mike. "You know what, Mr. Sullivan? I'm going to be a bus driver when I grow up, because I want to help kids the way you helped me." Mike watched the Martinez family walk away, surrounded by neighbors and friends who had become closer in the wake of their shared experience. The bus that had once been just a part of his job had become a symbol of something larger: the power of community, the importance of trust, and the difference one person could make by simply being there when needed. Later that evening, as Mike parked Bus 127 for the night, Sarah from dispatch brought him a surprise. "The superintendent wants you to see this," she said, handing him an official-looking document. It was a proposal to name the district's new Transportation Safety Center after him. But what caught his eye was the subtitle, "Where Every Journey Begins with Trust." Mike carefully added the document to Diego's scrapbook, which would join his collection of memories from 24 years of driving. Tomorrow he would start his route again. There would be new children, new stories, new opportunities to be the kind of adult who notices when something isn't right. As he locked up Bus 127 for the night, Mike remembered something Diego had said months ago. "Sometimes the best families are the ones we find along the way." Looking back at his faithful bus, gleaming in the setting sun, Mike couldn't help but agree. The 4 words that had started it all, "They're hurting my sister," had done more than save one family. They had reminded an entire community that sometimes the most important journeys aren't measured in miles, but in moments of trust, courage, and connection. And somewhere in Cedar Grove, a young boy dreamed of the day he would have his own bus route, ready to carry on the legacy of the driver who had taught him that heroes sometimes come with commercial driver's licenses and big yellow buses. As Mike walked to his car, he smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to make a difference. Because every morning when children stepped onto his bus, they weren't just starting their journey to school. They were joining a family that had been built one bus stop, one conversation, and one act of trust at a time. That family would continue to grow, shaped by the lesson they had all learned. That sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of courage, and that every journey, no matter how ordinary it might seem, has the potential to change lives forever.